ladies and gentlemen. I think we can start with the next session. It's a parallel session about smart energy future, whatever that means. So evidently we don't know where the smartness in the future will really be located. I've heard a lot of discussions during the last two days, and I was already talking about that. It was quite interesting to see that many people have been talking about the whole value chain, if you want. And when it came to the last element of the value chain, which is demand, in all the models that was a kind of a black box and was left out and was kind of working by itself, not being modeled really. So I think there's still some need to go more into details of what and how final customers are deciding and how they are participating in the market. Until now it's more like, yeah, if it's economic they will do it, and that's it. As it turns out, that's probably not how final customers are always thinking, and I'm already looking forward to having and getting some information, some ideas in the next 4 presentations. We have 4 presenters this afternoon. We are starting with Professor Lund from Aalto University in Finland. He is a professor in advanced energy systems at Aalto, and he has been very active and has 40 years of experience already, and he's going to present and give his talk about options of flexibility. I will then, after the presentation, ask everybody to try to concentrate maybe the talk to 15 to 20 minutes, if that's at all possible, so that we have enough time to discuss afterwards and to go into details as the audience wants. That's part of the story, as they say. Professor Lund.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me also thank the organizers for giving me the invitation to join this session. So in my talk, I will talk about the flexibility options, and just to frame slightly my talk, is that as the energy system existing energy system, the power system has a lot of flexibility options already. So I'm mainly looking on options which are relevant when you introduce very much renewable electricity, a lot of solar, wind. At a certain point, the energy system is able to cope with these changes, but there's a critical point after which you need to do something more with flexibility, and those options are something that I'm looking on. I'm looking for 3 perspectives: from the technical perspective, systems perspective, and also from the market's perspective quickly. I'm also presenting some case studies where we draw results from recent research, some papers, and also from a major Nordic large flexibility project called Flex4RES. So that's very briefly the outline of the talk, and let me just also remind about the also about the other elements of flexibility. Very often we think about flexibility as a matching option, matching the supply and demand in a better way. But I think flexibility relates very much also to the socio-technical transition that we have with the energy transition. So because of the transition, because of the change in the energy system, not that technologies are changing, but also the business models will change or need to change, the institutions need to change, the consumers need to change. And in that context, flexibility may have a very important role, not just as a matching technology, but also to create better business opportunities, to create better markets. So flexibility has much more dimensions, which I would definitely talk about today. Just very briefly review the literature on flexibility. I think the literature in flexibility is very ample, and this conference does a lot of papers in this. So you find much literature, which starts with a single system, going to regional systems, national systems, flexibility in different kind of spatial contexts. That's what we see very much about. And we see also flexibility dealt with in terms of different multidisciplinary kind of contexts, where you look on flexibility in terms of markets and in terms of policies, etc. So the settings of flexibility is manifold. And here today I may have more a skewed technical perspective because of my background. Now let's look on flexibility very briefly. I use here a quadrant where I look on cost and the kind of potential or the amount of flexibility that a technology can offer. And in the lower quadrant here, that's where we find the kind of traditional flexibility measures that you would very often also apply in the existing energy system. Demand-side management, demand-side response, curtailment, different kind of improved operations. In those, you don't see much capital investments. These would use more knowledge, IT, better practices. Whereas if you go to the upper quadrant, where we speak about energy storage, ramping power plants, these are very capital intensive, not that much, let's say, information intensive. So if you take storage, that's the most expensive, but of course the potential is large. So you gain more kind of flexibility by putting more money, more capital. So there's a certain difference here. Maybe the challenge is really to have a low cost and major flexibility options, and that maybe a few ones which I will present today may have that potential. So let's start next to move around the quadrant and start first with the low cost options here. And the first low cost options that very often which we use with or may use more with variable renewables is curtailment. Curtailment is quite simple. You just cut off, and in the picture here on the left-hand side, you see we cut off, for instance, the renewable production over a self-use limit, or there may be some other limits. Very simple, technically very simple to realize. Now, I mean, normally when you have solar and wind, you want to produce as much as possible. So why would you curtail? And here comes a very important trick. The capacity factor of solar wind is low compared to baseload plants. So even though you would curtail pretty much for a pretty long time, you could actually curtail much of the power, but you would not lose much in the energy. As the energy loss would be the curtailment times the curtailment time times the capacity factor. So the capacity factor, which is low, actually saves the day. So we can curtail pretty much without losing much in the energy. And that gives you much more flexibility. And so that's important. So having said that, curtailment may be a good option when you oversize your system. So if you have curtailment, you could put much more solar, much more wind beyond the self-use or self-consumption limit. It means that even on let's say, cloudy days or when you don't have so much wind, you would be able to produce much power. And then when it's very windy, you would curtail. And even though you curtail, you don't lose much in the energy. Now, this kind of curtailment, because of the very small losses we have, if you put a dynamic pricing tariff on the curtailment, your power plants, your solar power plant, your wind power plant also gains ramping capabilities. So let's assume that your wind power plant would always run 20%, or let's say a solar plant would run 20% below the nominal value. So you always curtail over the year 20%. So you have also always the ramp up possibility from 80 to 100% very quickly in milliseconds. This would be the quickest ramping up capacity in the power system what you could imagine. Much quicker than hydropower. But you would curtail and give a possibility for ramp up. Ramp down is always quick. Curtail down, that's very quick as such. But active curtailment means that the variable renewables would get more kind of dynamic properties, which they wouldn't normally have. You can control them in much a different way. Let me give you here an example about how much energy would you lose when you curtail. And I take my hometown, Helsinki, Finland here as an example. On the y-axis, we have the energy lost over a year, and here on the x-axis we have the curtailment limit. And now I curtail each hour of the year, day and night. Normally you wouldn't do that. It may be enough 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month a year, may be okay from the power system. This is conservative, so I curtail very heavily. So let me curtail 40%. So always 100% in nominal value, and I curtail to 60%, so 40 curtailed. On a yearly level, I would lose around 10% in energy. So think about what's the value of the 10% of energy lost compared to the dynamic values that you would have from the curtailment. Now, the problem is that tariffs, etc., very seldom value this curtailment. But if you had a value, there's a huge kind of energy system value in that curtailment. So the markets never were kind of planned in a way to give benefit of curtailment, just a benefit of producing energy. But again, in this case, the energy lost vis-a-vis the curtailment gain is much smaller. Now, moving then to the upper quadrant, remember more flexibility, higher cost. That brings us to energy storage. And when we think about energy storage, it may be useful to distinguish between a few parameters. The time of storage, so what's the response time? We speak from seconds to maybe hours, days. And then the size of the storage. So here in the lower quadrant, we have very quick storages where the response times may be seconds and up to some minutes, and the size of the storage may be quite small. And the technologies which work there quite well would be supercapacitors, some batteries. Move forward to the left to large applications. That's where batteries would come up. You have sometimes got a backup batteries, you have battery storage, battery power plants, in range up to some megawatts. And we've seen those already in the past. Lead-acid batteries were commonly used, maybe not that much today, but anyway, that's where the battery storage come up. But if you go to really the energy scale, that's the right-hand side, energy scale, where we speak of hundreds of megawatts, and let's say hours to days storage at least. That's interesting. That's where we don't have much technologies. The only one which would work would be, basically it's the hydropower, pump hydro, which is, if you take all storage that we have in the energy system, let's take everything, is over 99.2% of all storage. So most of the storage that we're speaking about today is really hydro-based. You may see in the future even the compressed air storage where you have big caverns into which you pump air with a compressor and a turbine which releases the gas, and you get then the power out of the storage. There's a few demonstration sites in the range of a few hundred megawatts. But this is the big question, the big storage. The batteries, maybe, in the future the batteries could do it at. If you have a lot of small batteries, but again, keep in mind the scale. Scale is huge. Now with the battery, there comes, or with the storage, there comes a range of ancillary services from the energy system point of view, which again, let's say the operators use, the DSOs and in particular TSOs would use those. But I'm not sure would the market value those fully yet. There's a range of important ancillary services which very often the power plants would take care of. And maybe the markets need to be reformed in order to get the benefits of storage fully appreciated. The batteries, that's something that we hear about in this conference pretty much. And what I would like to say about batteries is that if we take the, let's say, the best state-of-the-art prediction of battery costs from 2015, 2 years ago, and compare that to the latest battery cost curve by The Economist a few weeks ago, we see 2 years is enough that we make a prediction error of 50%. The cheapest batteries that we see, battery packs, are about $150 a kilowatt hour, which is enough for a breakthrough in the electric vehicle sector. So for electric vehicles, they say now that the batteries are okay, the price is okay. So now it's more kind of a other mechanism to bring the batteries on the market. A big question is, when would this come to the energy side, to PV systems, the smaller scale? We see battery manufacturers already differentiating themselves also to the stationary power market. We may see in the future also what we call a secondary battery market. So the primary battery market are the electrical vehicles. But once you drove with the car enough, the battery capacity comes down to, let's say, 70% of the nominal value. And then you have to change the battery. And those batteries may be quite okay still for the stationary applications where you don't need to move with the battery. And most likely that market may be interesting. The battery cost may be just a fraction of the cost that we'll see here. So when you do kind of battery, PV, kind of, or even wind kind of cost analysis, keep in mind the secondary market for the batteries, which may be much cheaper, maybe 1/3, 1/4 of the battery price that we see for the primary market, which is the electric vehicle market. So the batteries for the let's say the stationary applications may come quickly to the secondary market of batteries. Now, next, just a very quick look to the, let's see, to the third category of let's say, family categories for flexibility, which is not storage, but of which we have been talking very much about. It's the P2 something, P2X technologies. It's so we can put kind of different conversion technologies here in the final energy use to, in a way, balance the different final energy forms. Final energy forms, electricity, thermal energy, and fuel. And to balance those final energy outputs with the demand. And in particular, if you have a lot of variable renewables, that means you have too much electricity, so power to something may help to produce the different kind of final energy forms to, again, balance with the demand. Power to heat, power to thermal, power to gas, power to liquid, you just name. There's different ways. And the most, let's say, used one, which we already see in the traditional energy system. Let's say nighttime electric heating, that's where you use power to heat conversion. So the power heat, definitely in our conditions, is quite interesting. And for the basic reason that, let's say, most countries, looking at the final energy, not prime energy, final energy, the most important one is thermal energy. It's heating or cooling, which dominate the use. Typically, let's say in Vienna, I guess, half or even 2/3 of the final energy what you need in a city is thermal energy. Converting power to heat is very simple. And the infrastructure is there. If you have district heating, you can put the heat in the district heating network, or if you have, for instance, individual electric heating, heat pumps, it's very easy. Thermal storage, being chilled water or hot water, is very simple. Established technology in big scale, up to a few hundred megawatts, no problem, you find that. Daily storage, weekly storage. Cost would be 1 order to 2 orders, 1 to 2 orders cheaper than electric storage. So thermal storage is pretty easy in large scale. So once you have the solar or wind, maybe not solar, but wind in the wintertime in terms of heat, that's what you would need in the city. It's quite easy to bring into the energy system. Now, through these technologies, you would also be able to shift your kind of supply curves so that if you think about having a lot of variable renewables, marginal zero cost, what happens is that you remember that the renewables, they push the supply cost curve more to the left, and curtailment brings it back to the right, and curtailment brings back to the left. So in a way, in terms of earning logic, using active curtailment may not be bad. So your average price may be much higher. And again, the economic loss is very small. You don't lose much wind, you don't lose much PV, even though you curtail. But your average price will increase much more. So the gains, economic gains, would be much larger. And also for the system point of view, again, curtailment would in this case give much more dynamics. Now, putting all the flexibility together, what does it mean in terms of the markets is that instead of having a singular price curve, so demand supply crossing point, having this flexibility actually measures brings you to price regime. And that's an optimization question. Where is your optimal point? But basically, flexibility would bring the earning logics to the market actors to do something. Otherwise, you're always at a very low price, and that would not enhance any investments. So you can, in a way, I would say, in quotation marks, manipulate price in some way, but bring a price signal which is enough to also justify investments. Now, just the final slide, a case study from Helsinki where we applied these flexibility measures in large scale. And just a few words about Helsinki, which was half of the size of Vienna. Heat demand about 6-7 terawatt hours, electricity demand 4-5 terawatt hours. And what we do here is as there's a lot of CHP based on coal and natural gas, we put wind energy in this study. Let's see what happens with the energy systems. And we use power to heat conversion here, as Helsinki has a very established district heating network, very easy to put the heat in the electric heat into the network if necessary. So the first one is just that that's just looking on the baseline, which is where the wind is size dimensioned against the power demand, gives you a quarter of the electricity, could be wind, that's the maximum. Now looking on the energy as a whole, power and heat demand, so let's size the wind against power and heat together. That brings the wind share up to 60% without electricity, a single electron flowing out of the city. So the community actually would be very flexible. It would not disturb the energy market in a way. Now there's a more caveat here. You see that the wind heat would not be that much. 2% of the heat would be wind heat. So most of the curtailed energy, that's not so much curtailment. But you raise the wind power very much. So 2%, that's what we need to curtail of the 100%. And if you have CHP, this is a big problem, in the sense that CHP is always going to run against heat demand. Now, if you put electricity from wind power, which replaces the CHP, where does the heat come from? So keep in mind the heat side. And somewhere we need heat. That's the dominating final energy form in our society. So you would need to have some heating-only boilers as well, maybe more wind energy with heat pumps or some biomass boilers. So if you decouple the put CHP and wind, you run always with a problem where the heat may be a problem. There's a deficit of that one. The final, Chairman, the final figure now is where we extend this study into a few other flexibility options. We put DSM, we put storage, and we also look on wind, and then we put a price signal. We connect the whole model with the spot price. So let's see how this works in the energy market with real prices. And here is the final results with which I close, is that here you see on the XY axis we have the wind and the solar share, and here on the Z axis we see the surplus of variable renewable. If we just take the solar, the DSM, and we have very accurate 10-minute DSM data for different loads in the city, so we can manipulate refrigerators, retails, etc. And doing that, the DSM can help about a quarter of the solar surplus. One quarter, that's what we can regulate by shifting loads. But the largest kind of, let's say, surplus treatment comes from curtailment, power to heat. And you see here with wind, for instance, a lot of wind, if we put that, most of that would be actually surplus. Through the power to heat, we can bring it down. So it means that most of the wind we can use locally through the power to heat, where wind also supplies heat. An interesting question in our case is that actually when we add storage, it doesn't add much of that. So adding heat storage or storage in the district heating network would not add much value beyond the power to heat. That may be a specific question for our system. Now in terms of cash flow, let's see on the cash flow. We take the average three-year cash flow. With the DSM, let's say if we have the base case is no flexibility, but let's put much wind, much solar. Compared to that, DSM would give a 10% benefit. Economic benefit, cash flow benefit. But with power to heat, we get even 50 to 80%. So from the business point of view, that's not bad, actually. So, I would then just finish here and thank you for the attention, and also draw your attention to a few studies if you're interested to see more about the flexibility in a larger scale, Nordic scale, the Flex Fortress project, and just a recent report from the European Academy of Science on storage, which says that by 2030, storage is not a big problem, but after that it will be a big problem. So the energy system flexibility that we have today is enough for the next 10 years, but it may be worthwhile to look on storage more carefully, so that beyond 2030, storage may be a big issue. So with these words, I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. I would be happy to take 2 or 3 questions which are immediate to the presentation. Yes, please.
I think you're from KIT. I have a question concerning the slide where you presented the costs of the storages. And I was a bit surprised that you suppose that demand response is quite cheap compared to other storages. Probably you can declare this a bit to us.
Yes, that's the quadrant where you have the cost flexibility. Basically, the demand response would be shifting loads. So you need a time shift. So it would be quite simple. Something that we use already, for instance, have used for many decades with electric heating, where you shift the electric heating from day to night. So that would be cheap. So demand side, that would not include your energy efficiency improvement, just the control in a way. Whereas in the storage, you will have the physical storage device. So demand side response is just the control on the top of your electric device. If I understood correctly your question.
I agree with you that in the first few percent are very cheap, but then if you increase stability, shift load, it's very expensive.
Absolutely, and what we find with the data that we have for the whole city is that on an hourly basis we could, let's say, cut 5 to 50% on an hourly basis. But then on a yearly basis, 10% is about maximum. So, and with P we had about 25, but you're right. I mean, the aggregated values would be much more modest than the hourly values.
So, thank you very much. After we have heard something about flexibility more on the wholesale side, I would say, I would welcome Mr. Terdevet. He is a Secretary General of Enedis, that's the French DSO, and he is lecturing at the Collège d'Europe on energy networks. And I'm looking forward to your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johannes. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to speak in front of you this afternoon, and in particular of the French distribution operator system Enedis. And Johannes, in the beginning, says that in the value chain, the distributor was before, at the end of the value chain. And I would like to say to you this afternoon that for us, we have two certainties that DSO are now at the center of the energy transition process. In sort of memory, Enedis is just between the transmission system operator RTE, who is in charge of medium and low voltage in France, and we are in charge for us of the distribution system globally in France for 19% of the country. And in France, like also in Europe, the distribution organizations are independent of the supplier, and the market is open in all the country from 2 years ago, from 10 years ago, from 2007. And it's very important because maybe there are confusion between supplier and distribution activities. That's not the same activity. Distribution is a regulated activity, and the supplier are in competition, fully in competition. Oh, just a problem of slide. Yes. Okay. Next, what are the main mission of Enedis? We have 6 main mission: connecting customer to the grid. And for example, every year we have 100,000 more consumers to connect to the grid. And we are in crisis in Europe, like in other parts of the world. But every year we have a new consumer. We have to have connect with the grid. It's necessary. Other mission, we have to running and modernize the grid. We have also to metering consumption for all the energy supplier. We are ensuring troubleshooting every day and every hour. We have also to operating and remote controlling the grid by means of 31 control towers. We are in the landscape, and we are also supporting the bottom-up movement of local community project with emerging. In summary, electricity distribution in France, as a public electricity distribution grid belongs to the local community. They entrust their maintenance and development to Enedis, and Enedis is the main manager in France of the French distribution grid, covering 95% of the landscape. In a few figures, we are subsidiary of EDF, but independent in EDF in terms of governance and management. We have about 14 billion of revenue per year, and we invest 3.5 billion of euro per year for the totally of 36 million of consumers. And this is, in short, one of the biggest electric networks in the world. Nearly 1,400,000 kilometers of medium and low voltage line, and in the domain, it's a network. 98% of the new lines are now barriered. And it's a difference between TSO, transmission system operators, and DSO is more easy to bar new lines for distribution because it's not too expensive like in transmission system operator. What are the radical change expected for power distribution networks? I see 4 principal change. First, climate and decarbonization policies and technical and digital innovation were driving radical change to the business of DSO. We are also responsible to connect and to integrate more and more capacity of renewable and decentralized energy source, as well as battery storage, charging station for electric vehicles. We have also to face demand side management, self-consumption more and more, and improved energy efficiency. And last but not least, we have also to access to more data. Will have to be managed for end users as well as for different stakeholders of the electric system value chain. Our new challenge, that's the high volume of new data from numerous and diverse sources and increasing complexity in system architecture and process, which introduce business risk and potential to increasing cost. The regulatory framework are not designed today to the new world, resulting in the real risk of loss of profitability and a resulting stifling of innovation. And that's essential for driving the change needed. The mismatch between the regulatory incentive mechanism for DSO investment and optical levels of capital and operational expenditure is also a new challenge for us. And the last challenge, we have also to network planning and construction based on first consideration and incorrect business assumption is not automatically to anticipate this one. This slide to explain you that we have very different in land in country like France between wind farm production and PV production. The wind farm production with 10 gigawatt of production per year is more at the north of the France. And you can observe that the photovoltaic production is more, with the majority of production sites, is the south of the France. And it's not, it's justification to have a vision in terms of system, of electric system, and also to organize maybe flexibility with storage of energy at local level, at regional level, and maybe also at national level. And 10 years ago, we don't have the same organization of local production. In terms of quality of service, we have an objective to maintain a low level for the interruption of service, and you can observe that from 2008, like last year, we have a very good performance of quality of service, but it's not a miracle. It's due to the investment every year to remove, to renewal, to anticipate the construction of the network. For the consumer, what is the cost of distribution in the part of the price of electricity? We have a rate of 9 to 39% less expensive in France of the cost of distribution than the European average. We can observe. DSO, like Enedis, is also a local operator with different sorts of objective. For example, with a major town planning and housing renovation project, with contribution with in-town planning design, with support of local town planning and territorial plan. That the term territorial climate energy is a term of the French law of 2015. We have also to organize conventions for access to service in rural areas. We support territory for energy positive. That's also a term of French law. And in fact, we have to combine a national vision of an organization of electricity with local approach and with local construction of the different town, of the different community. Concerning the meters, the smart meters, we deploy at the moment secure high standard technology with a smart meter, Linky. And in 2021, we will have a totally full deploy the meter. It's a very important subject for Enedis, because the budget, like we can see, is 5 billion euro in totally for all the consumer. It's very, very important for a company like Enedis. Maybe for 5 minutes, just to insist maybe on the changing business model. What are the radical change for us that social technologies regulation change? But also we have to anticipate and make the most of its new role in the decentralized world while mitigating other change. EV, electric vehicle, like Peter said, DSM, storage, and it's necessary to anticipate this evolution. We have to answer and to develop local model and decentralized energy scenario like Christophe with this team makes, and we have also to observe all the landscape. And I would like to quote one who is one of the officials of the DG Energy, Claude-Dieter Borchardt, who say this is the century of DSO, and I say that good expression. In the winter clean energy package, the role of DSO is now acknowledged, and an organization like EDSO is at the center of the world. The EDSO as a key player for the European governance of new system of energy and of electricity, and in the past, the organization of the market was structured by the TSO, Transmission System Operator. That's not only the situation at the moment, and the DSO will have more and more importance in the future. Just to conclude, this one I delivered on 23 February 2015, a report to the President of the French Republic, François Hollande, Energy, a Network, a Europe. And in the report, I wrote 12 proposals to structure European energy into network. And for example, it's necessary, from my point of view, to encourage cross-border cooperation between distribution system operators and not only transmission system operators. We will announce in few weeks a project between Germany and France. It's very important because the distributor organization was in the past only in each country. It's necessary to have cooperation at the European level. It's also necessary for me to interconnect the pioneer of local energy governance and to exchange, for example, about success and failure that we have in Europe in the local approach, the local political energy, and not only in each country, each state. It's necessary to have an exchange between different local energy community. I suggest to pull the European efforts of R&D with respect to smart grids and not only in each country. We can also create maybe an energy European data platform to protect the data in the respect of the law and the right of the citizen. I propose also to create corridors for innovative mobility. That's only deployment of charging terminal station able to recharge vehicles in a few minutes on European motorway, and every 18 kilometers maybe. And this project begin in Spain, in Portugal, in Benelux, in France, in Germany too, and we can maybe have in few months announce on the question, because the Union for Energy is the term of the Commission Juncker, but we don't have at the moment many realization, many concrete realization of this Union of Energy. That may be one of the solutions. And to go to the end and to conclude, I propose to establish a European College of Energy to recomposing the European energy landscape, because the recomposing of the European energy landscape cannot be reduced simply to a question of investment in network, regulation or organization. It implies also, from my point of view, and more than anything, a significant need for education, training and intellectual sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In view of time, I would suggest that we have the discussion at the end of this session. And I would like to invite Mr. Merz from Ponton, which is a service provider to the energy industry in principle, and has always been very active in wholesale markets. But now we hear something about a new technology, which is blockchain. Well, new technology is a bit exaggerating. Maybe it's already some years ago that it has been invented. But there are many projects nowadays which are trying to see whether blockchain technology can be used in the energy industry, in what respect. And I'm looking forward to hear your presentation.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for having me here. My name is Michael Merz. I'm Managing Director of Ponton. We are located in Hamburg, in Germany, and our focus is B2B integration. And indeed, we're doing this already for 15 years, and until about 1.5 years ago, B2B integration was just connecting companies to exchange data with each other and doing that in a very efficient way, which we have also done with Austrian grid operators. operators as a part of the EDA project. And my personal background is I've studied computer science, and distributed system was the topic. And when I received my PhD in the 90s, there was a cryptocurrency which was called eCash, which is really long ago. It's more than 20 years ago, and I was fascinated about that. But eCash at that time didn't really fly. It was too centralized. It was not connected to real currencies, to legal tender, so you couldn't go to an exchange and trade eCash for euro or for Deutschmark at that time. And so this whole topic, I neglected that, and I got it more or less out of sight. And in 2011, I discovered Bitcoin. And I was fascinated because the old fire started again, and obviously it works, yeah? And it still works today. Bitcoin has been at this historic high some days ago. And the fact that Bitcoin works proves first that a system can work without centralized control, which is interesting, just as a fact. And it's also a system which works at low cost. Now you may say, oh, Bitcoin is expensive because the mining is so expensive. And yes, the mining is expensive. But if you replace the mining by a little bit more control and by just defining who will be the so-called validator who is going to create the next block of the blockchain, you could do it much cheaper. And this is exactly where the development goes to. So it's valid to say that it also comes at low cost, because the foundation of a blockchain, the nodes which host the data which makes up the blockchain, you can host that for 10, 15, 20 euro a month on a virtual machine that you rent somewhere at Amazon. So this is where this hype comes from. There is a creature which just stands on its own. It's sometimes compared with Skynet from the Terminator movie. Yeah? It was once launched, but you cannot really shoot it down. So it is a bit like that, because you would have to shoot down the whole internet if you want to bring down Bitcoin. Yeah? And it's low cost, and it is a new technology. So this somehow inspires fantasies of changing all processes and blockchainify all possible processes. And this is where this whole hype comes from. But we have to be sober here, and we have to be realistic. When we talk about blockchain, it's an option. Yeah? There are some processes which may make sense to be organized on top of a blockchain infrastructure, but I'm sure that 90% or 99%, who knows, of today's processes and possibly also the future process will not be blockchainified. So let's be blockchain agnostic, and let's consider processes which may make sense to be executed over the blockchain. So I have a starting slide, which is, I mean, this is an energy competent cycle here, so I don't need to talk too much about how classical hierarchical grids work. And if you put in contrast to the classical grids today's smart grids, the most interesting thing in all these visualizations is actually the visualization. Yeah, so you see beautiful science fiction images here of the future, and they all try to identify what a smart grid really is, but it's very creative. And actually, if you look at it, it's not really different from science fiction book covers from the 70s. Yeah, so this could also be a smart grid painted by a 70s science fiction book designer. But how does the world look? I'm from Hamburg, yeah, in the north of Germany. I think in the world, this is the place which is the world lab for volatility. We have areas close to Hamburg where the production is 250% of the local consumption, yeah, because of wind energy. We have several gigawatts of wind production only in the Bundesland of Schleswig-Holstein. And so we have volatility in the grid. We need to consume as much as possible. We have to be flexible also to consume that. And what we could use as a way to handle this is the market. Yeah? Let's not do demand-side management, let's not do supply-side management. Let the market participants, who are providers of flexibility, who are generators and who are consumers, let them decide at which price they want to produce how much and or consume which volume. And we could start this at the local grid level by having prosumers and consumers, the prosumers producing solar power and possibly even wind power, the consumers sharing a part of this production. And how to share that? By using supply and demand at the local basis. And as a side effect, if we do it in the right way, if we give the right price signals for the commodity, electricity, and also for the commodity capacity in a dynamic way, we could achieve probably a situation where up to a certain level the balancing of the local grid is done, but probably also not at 100%. But we hopefully can reduce the demand for, how's it called, reserve capacity required from third parties. So if we look at this, we could easily think of higher grid levels where we again have a regional market which is connected to the local markets and which provides exactly the residual capacity that is needed down here or vice versa. And again, we could imagine that this goes up recursively up to the wholesale market. So this is the spectrum, let's say, that we may consider if we talk about applying new technology in energy trading. And if we look at that in this architecture, if you like, blockchain is often used as a infrastructure for communication, coordination, and data exchange between market participants. And there is a horizontal element here, which is required to bring metadata on the production and consumption side onto the blockchain, such that other processes, application level processes, can use that, yeah, and perform their individual tasks, like trading in the microgrid, or trading on the wholesale market, or trading flexibility, or managing the grid, and also coordinating processes with a TSO focus, with processes with a DSO focus. There's not enough time to explain each and every box, and therefore also each and every of these applications. But let me start here. Peer-to-peer trading in the microgrid. This is, well, there are probably about 50 startups in Germany trying to do that, or aiming at doing that, yeah? And probably only 2 or 3 or 1 will survive, because this is an extreme low transaction cost business. We are talking about kilowatt hours with a wholesale price, including sales cost of 7 cents, let's say. And if you want to build a platform facilitating that, then probably the transaction fee might be half a cent at that level. And then, of course, you have all the surcharges, the taxes, the levies, specifically in Germany. Austria has a much better situation. In Germany, we pay 29 cents per kilowatt hour. So it's a very difficult situation to do that. But why are they all doing that? They hope that in the future, their regulation will be changed, and that the regulation will favor the local generation and the local consumption of power. And so I think this is a land-grabbing phase where these startups try to get as many as possible participants in order to be prepared when such a process starts, possibly in 3 years or 5 years' time. But it is a quite risky business because of the very, very low transaction revenues that you can get from such a process. A little bit higher in the hierarchy, we have the trading of flexibility. We do a project here in the region of Hamburg, which is called NEW40. NEW stands for Norddeutsche Energiewende, Northern German Energy Change. And the idea here is to make flexibility available on a market-based form. So it's not just the DSO requesting flexibility from the demand side, for example, but it is providing an infrastructure which enables the demand side and the supply side to offer this on a market, depending on the price for power and for capacity. And then we have the whole market, which is Enerchain. This is probably the signature project that we are doing, which is also based on blockchain technology. This is trading gas and power, forward products, spot products, but without an exchange. Full stop, in a decentralized way. I have another slide on that. Settlement is a typical blockchain case. I mean, Bitcoin is also settlement, yeah. A Bitcoin transaction is just an entry in the ledger where you have a buyer account and a seller account, or a payer and payee account and the amount, plus some additional overhead. And if you use that in connection with any industrial process where money is to be transferred, so for example, between aggregators and generators in the case of a balancing power request, or between the aggregator and the TSO, then you can combine the monetary transaction with the functional transaction within that process. So once an aggregator reports to the TSO, I have produced the requested 50 megawatt hours at 30 euro each, you can write this statement into the blockchain and do the booking of the payment at the same time. So this is instantaneous payment, and that is interesting because here we are combining one blockchain feature, which is booking, like Bitcoin, with another blockchain feature, which is data communication between participants. In a specific functional process. We are doing also a project here with Austrian grid operators, which is called GridChain. And this is not only about payments between aggregators and TSOs, or between generators and aggregators. It's also about integrating TSO-centric processes with DSO-centric processes. So just to give an example, the TSO performs a balancing power request, which is responded by an aggregator. The aggregator in turn requests the balancing power from generation units. A generation unit, one of them is requested to produce for the next 15 minutes time slot, is requested to produce 5 megawatt. Then in that local grid where this generation unit is located, we have a congestion situation because of the volatility. It doesn't apply to Austria, but it applies to Germany at least, and maybe in the future it will also apply to Austria and to other countries. So now the DSO has to interfere and has to stop this. Yeah? And it would be much better if the DSO could listen to the aggregator requesting this balancing power from the generation unit 15 minutes earlier, and immediately react and intervene and stop the generator from ramping up when the delivery is to be started. So this is where we use the blockchain for. It's a communication channel. Two of them exchange messages. There's the aggregator who intends to talk to the generator, but the DSO also listens, because what is blockchain? It's a publication mechanism. It's a number of nodes to which all the participants are connected, and whenever someone writes an entry, a transaction into the node, the others can read that. Yeah? So transparency is also a blockchain feature. And by using this transparency, the DSO will listen what's going on there, and if something is going on which conflicts with a reduced available capacity on that local net, the DSO can intervene. So that's the GridChain project. And let me go ahead. Let me talk about Enerchain. Enerchain is wholesale trading. So we are talking about intraday hours, intraday quarter hours, day-ahead products. We talk about future products like months or quarters or years for gas and power. And the participants are large traders which traditionally have been trading energy or gas products over the past 15 years. But there's one very important thing missing, what you would usually see in the wholesale market slide or picture, and that is this gap here. We don't have a broker and we don't have an exchange.